The International Monetary Fund has projected India's GDP to plunge in FY21 by 10.3%. The Washington based lender said that its world economic outlook is far worse than the 4.5% decline predicted in June. The 5.8 percentage point downgrade was the biggest of the world's main economies. This reflects a severe than anticipated contraction in economic activities in the first quarter as a result of the nationwide lockdown as well as the rapidly spreading pandemic. The forecast indicates that the country is now facing the biggest contraction of major emerging markets in the wake of coronavirus pandemic. The IMF said June quarter GDP was weaker than projected in India, where domestic demand plunged following a very sharp compression in consumption and a collapse in investment. In the group of emerging economies, revisions to the forecast are particularly large for India, where GDP contracted much more severely than expected in the second quarter, the IMF said in its report. India's lockdown at the end of March was the world's largest, causing the GDP to contract 23.9% in the June quarter, making it the worst performer among the G20 economies. The IMF's outlook for India is worse than the RBI's prediction of a 9.5% decline in GDP in the current fiscal year. For the world as a whole, the 2020 growth projection has been revised upwards by 0.8 percentage points relative to June as a result of a less dire second quarter and signs of a stronger recovery in the third quarter, partly offset by downgrades in certain developing countries and emerging economies. The global growth may see a less severe contraction, however, a deep recession at minus 4.4% in 2020. It will then bounce back to 5.2% in 2021 as per the IMF. The IMF warned that the pandemic will reverse the progress made since the 1990s in reducing global poverty and will also increase inequality. Without naming India, IMF chief economist Geeta Gopinath said emerging market and developing economies are managing this crisis with fewer resources as many are constrained by elevated debt and higher borrowing costs. These economies will need to prioritize critical spending for health and transfers to the poor and ensure maximum efficiency. Where debt is unsustainable, it should be restructured sooner than later to free up finances to deal with this crisis, she added. On the positive side, India is expected to rebound in 2021 with an 8.8% growth rate in 2021, thus regaining the position of the fastest growing emerging economy, surpassing China's projected growth rate of 8.2%.